Welcome back and thank you for staying with us on The Conversation. Now, Kenya's parliament is planning to impeach President Rigathi Gachagua over allegations of supporting anti-government protests, corruption, and misconduct. Now, Gachagua becomes the first, if he is impeached, he will become the first deputy president to be removed from office through the impeachment process in the nation's political history. Now, we have 281 MPs who voted to impeach Gachagua, exceeding the required two-thirds majority, while 44 MPs opposed it. Gachagua was elected as deputy president in 2022, and, he played a prominent role in the administration. And right now, we're trying to see if the Senate would actually approve the process or the proceedings, so it is confirmed if he will be impeached or not. Now, joining us on the show, we have George Kimando, Executive Director, Tunza Kenya Initiative, Nairobi, Kenya. Hello, George. Thank you so much for joining us at this time.
And good evening. How are you?
Very well, thank you. All right. So, George, can you, first of all, let's start, with a brief background of what triggered the fallout between President Ruto and his vice president or deputy president, Gachagua. Just briefly.
Number one, you need to understand the political context of the whole impeachment process. And while the differences between the president and his deputy may not be very clear to majority of the people out here, there must have been fundamental issues. And one of them is about the control of the electorate. The basic structure of the politics in Kenya elections is about who spearheads a bigger number of the votes towards the election of the president. So I think the most fundamental conflict has been the control of those numbers in control of government and ahead of the next elections. That, to me, is the biggest issue. Who is controlling what numbers? When you get a deputy president who is also very popular, and whereby you may find that the president is not comfortable with that. Otherwise, this is purely a political process, and it should be understood in that context.
Okay. Now, let's talk about, so many people actually have so many concerns and so many opinions as to why Gachagua, there are calls for him to be impeached. Now, would you say that his impeachment can be viewed as a test case for Kenya's constitutional provisions and institutional strength, or merely a political witch hunt? Because you talked about, having power of electorates.
Yeah, you need to understand, and I need to repeat this again, that you need to understand the political context of this whole process. Number one, you need to understand that the sole mover of this motion against the deputy is the president. You need to understand that it is the president's motion against his deputy. The only thing is that he's using parliament to fight his battles, because that is a legal process. He can't, by law, he can't wake up one day and sack the deputy president. So it is his motion to get rid of his deputy. That should be very clear about it. We may speculate the reasons,
did you say
as I mentioned earlier.
It is his motion, or is his notion to get rid of his deputy? Is that what you just said?
I said it is his motion. I mean, this whole process, it has only one sponsor, the president. Nobody else can do whatever is happening. Okay? You need to understand that.
So you agree that so it is indeed a witch hunt?
Because, as I said, by law, the president, largely yes. And even if you took the time to listen to the arguments by Parliament yesterday, number one, and even going back further, the kind of process that led to the impeachment yesterday, legally speaking, there was no ground, that could start a legal scrutiny. This is purely a personal thing that, for whatever reason, that the president wants his deputy out, for whatever reasons. But I doubt if it went to the court, even as a lay person, I doubt it can stand in the legal scrutiny.
Okay. Now, speaking of, this whole proceeding, Gachagua himself actually called it shameful and sensational. That was what he described, the impeachment motion. And we would like to hear your opinion right now. Does the National Assembly's overwhelming vote in favor of impeachment, that's 281, 44, and 1, also reflect a genuine concern for accountability? That's what we want to know. Does it also mean that, the fight for corruption is actually, is actually what they're looking out for, aside just the witch hunt, which you said, is the major reason?
Let me take you back a little by about 3-4 days earlier. There was a purported public participation of that exercise. And I'll tell you what, one thing, the Kenyan parliament is largely disconnected from the public and from the voter. If you remember in June when we had the protests and the riots that led to the suspense of the Finance Bill 2024, the same thing happened. Parliament voted overwhelmingly for that Finance Act, again because it was being pushed by the president. But the parliamentarians, after the people rioted, it was recalled. What does that tell you? That today's parliament in Kenya is largely disconnected from the. In fact, on Friday and Saturday, when there was the purported public participation about the impeachment motion, over 90% of Kenyans are very clear that is not even an issue to us. What we are concerned about is, there are more fundamental issues that are concerned to the Kenyan public. It's about health. Right now, there's a movement from the National Health Insurance Fund to something else. The education sector is in a lot of chaos right now. There's corruption that is eating our country. The economy is doing badly. So the issue of impeaching a deputy president, who is not even, in terms of administration, is simply just a principal assistant to the president. So even if there were any accusations to be leveled against him, the first person that should be impeached is the president himself, not the deputy, actually. So back to your question, and more specifically, the general thing is that the parliamentarians in Kenya are very disconnected from the public.
All right. So from what I gathered, you actually did also say that the parliament is also rubber stamp, and that the fact that there's so much corruption, eating deep, and this whole motion definitely is not a fight against corruption. But can you speak to us, or can you tell us what specific acts of misconduct, corruption, and abuse of office, has led to him, being impeached?
Actually, if you listen to what was brought to the House as the grounds for the impeachment motion, there was nothing legal about that. And this was okay. So like now there was the accusations of misuse of office to to do business with government. There was the accusation of that he has used his office to transact, to get money corruptly. But to see the legal stance about that, number one, Parliament is not legally mandated to do that. It doesn't even have the instruments of investigations and prosecution of such matters. Because like the cases of the corruption cases and crime against Kenyan people, those are matters that should be handled by various investigative agencies or the government. The police, number one, they should investigate cases of criminal capability. We have the issues of the corruption cases. There's the element of, we have the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission, the EACC. We have, in the case of misdemeanor, there's a director of criminal investigation. So all those things that were brought to Parliament were issues that could have been reported to those institutions. And the least they could have done was to bring the evidence that has been adduced by those investigative agencies to accuse him even in Parliament. Mm-hmm. But in this case, there are allegations that are not even backed up by any evidence. Okay, so as I'm telling you, it is a purely, to me, it's actually ridiculous. in fact, to me, it's an embarrassment that our National Assembly can bring such a frivolous motion in Parliament and use its numbers to pass it to the House. To me, it's actually an embarrassment.
Okay. Now, it's also dependent, the impeachment is also dependent on the Senate's approval. So can you tell us what's the timeline for Senate's review of the impeachment motion? And, how will their decision impact the Deputy President's term in office?
The Senate is, in fact, earlier today, the Senate was convened by the Speaker, Amazon Kingi, and they have a timeline of next week, Wednesday and Thursday. It's the 2 days to hear the accusations and the allegations and make a decision by the close of Thursday next week. So if the Senate upholds the impeachment motion and finds the Deputy President guilty, then he starts impeached. But you need to understand that beyond the Senate decision, he has the option of going to court. And already there was a case that was filed today, but I think the mention is on Friday, if I'm not wrong, that already he's fighting back that the process has been so deformed with irregularities and unfairness that he did not stand a chance to start a fair hearing, even in that Senate. But just to go back to your question squarely, is that the Senate has, after the Speaker of the Senate receives the writ from the National Assembly, then he has 2 days to relate the information to the members of the Senate, which he did already. And they already have a timeline that was announced earlier today to have the hearings on Wednesday and Thursday next week. Their decision should be final in the political process, unless now the Deputy President or the accused for that matter chooses to pursue further redress in a court of law.
Okay. Now, George, earlier you did talk about, the anti-government protest. Would love for you to explain to us, how the anti-government protest, in June contributed to his impeachment, because he was also accused. That was one of his accusations.
Come again? I have lost you.
Okay, I was asking, I said you talked about, the anti-government protest, and it was one of the accusations that was actually leveled against the Deputy President as well. Would love for you to explain to us or expatiate how these protests, contributed to Gachagua's impeachment.
I won't say if they contributed, because there were allegations by people around the president that the deputy was among the financiers of those protests. And why very many of us see this as a witch hunt actually is because the president himself, after those allegations have been profiled by people around him, he came out in public at some point, a few weeks later, and accused other people like the Fund Foundation. In fact, it was taken up even internationally in the news. He accused the Fund Foundation, the former president Uhuru Kenyatta, and other people, and even alleged of of another country international to have funded the protests. So for anybody to come up later and say that this appeal was funded by the deputy president, it shows the confusion around those allegations. That is why very many of us find it very ridiculous, actually, even to be, most of this coming from the president and the people around him, accusing his deputy of funding the protests. Because, as I've just told you, he himself, as president, came out very clear and talked about other potential funders of the protests. So it would be very, very flimsy indeed to peg those accusations on the deputy president.
Okay. So now, speaking of the protests, let's actually assess the current mood of Kenyan citizens, regarding the government in general, and the fact that they've actually demanded for President Ruto's resignation. What role would you say public opinion is playing in the impeachment process?
As I've told you, two things. Number one, as I've mentioned to you, the members of parliament who were the carriers of the motion are very, very, very disconnected.
I'm talking about citizens themselves, the Kenyan citizens themselves. Public opinion is what I'm talking about.
Yes, I'm coming there. So when they brought up the issue of the public participation, over 90% of Kenyans were very clear that the issue of the deputy president does not even come close to the concerns that we have as a country. And that the impeachment motion, in fact, it should be, if there's anybody who ought to be impeached, is the president himself. Because ultimately, the buck stops with him. In fact, the deputy is merely his principal assistant, who has got absolutely no powers other than what is delegated to him by the president. Okay, so in fact, the public opinion, over 90% of it was, if there's going to be any impeachment, two things. Number one, that impeachment thing is not even our priority, number one. And number two, if we have to impeach anybody, it should be the president himself.
All right. Now, earlier you did say that, Kenyan parliament is largely disconnected, from the public, and then there's actually a confusion within the parliament itself, and also that the deputy president has actually appealed, the impeachment motion. He has gone to court himself. So do you think that looking at this and every other, aspect of this impeachment motion, do you think that it can destabilize President Ruto's government, like everything happening right now?
By a long shot, yes, because when there's political instability anywhere, there is the instability that comes. There's the cascading effects of it, also economically and also socially. So a destabilized government definitely will lead to uncertainties around the economic aspects of the country. So yes, there'll be effect about that. And again, also the aspect, also the other thing is that the Kenyan politics are highly ethnicized. People have a lot of attachment to their tribal background. And I can tell you this, even if you're not asked about it, one of the key disappointments from the Kenyan population is this, that in the last elections, people largely voted based on issues. And for the first time since the multipartism came back to a country in 1992, that's about 32 years ago. This is the first election that was largely non-tribal. So to see us going back to the ethnic balkanization because of the disconnect between the president and his deputy is a very sad situation. And very many Kenyans are very worried about that aspect. But yes, it can have the effect because of the largely tribal.
I'm sorry, you said something about, ethnic. I'm trying to understand. Are you saying that, ethnic politics is actually playing a role in this?
Of course, you can see that. You can see the main formations politically. That is what also was used to marshal the numbers in parliament. Okay, so you have a certain, certain parties which have got certain members who are from a certain ethnic origination, supported the motion based on the way they were whipped to come and vote for or against the DP. So yes, ethnic numbers were used largely in favor of the movers of the motion.
Okay. So just before we wrap up, in 1 minute, can you please give us your final thoughts just before we round up?
As most Kenyans of sober minds have profiled about this entire thing, it would have been a very simple thing, because I don't think we needed to get here, number one. And number two, I agree largely with the sentiments of much of the public that we have more fundamental issues to deal with than political shenanigans. We have got deep economic issues. We have got key issues on our health sector, on our education sector. The economic situation is not very good. In fact, there's a lot of things about very high taxations and all that. So the issue of playing political supremacy, it is the least of our concerns. And I think as a country, we are better off focusing on what is important to us.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, George Kimando, Executive Director, Tunza, Kenya Initiative, all the way from Nairobi, Kenya. We appreciate you for your time.
Thank you very much, and have a good evening.